This episode of Where Did the Road Go is brought to you in part by our Patreons. In particular, this month is being sponsored by Lindsay Marie Trebet and Nick Martin. I thank you both so very much. And if you want to become a patron, you can do so at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And now our show.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Seriah.
All right, welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? And I am joined by the long-lost Joshua Cutchin.
Long lost to the kingdom of fatherhood, apparently.
So the fairies brought you two children.
Yeah, so far they've brought them and they haven't taken them back. I keep on resisting the urge to go to the tack store and get me a horseshoe to put over the bed. I haven't done that yet. Maybe I should.
Well, things are going well for you.
Yes, going great. Just tired. That's all. Just tired, not a lot of time. But other than that, great.
Yes. So, we didn't have a set idea of what we were going to talk about tonight, and we kind of came up with the idea of kind of going over some of this phenomena and what we think is going on. And did you want to start with the one you just mentioned?
Yeah, I think that's a fine place. It's going to get us into the weeds pretty quick on things. There is a Twitter account that I follow called the Pine Barrens Institute. That's seems to be some good people behind it, but they're pretty ardent about a lot of their flesh and blood cryptozoology. But they did post something that really surprised me, which was they said that they felt that it was a controversial opinion, but they were of the belief that Skinwalkers were not a cryptid. To which my response was, "That's a controversial opinion," because I've never really thought of Skinwalkers as being anything involving flesh and blood, material, animal sort of things. But apparently there's a large contingency of people that have thought that, and that sort of took the conversation in a couple of different directions. Like, for example, I've always been baffled about Mothman being a cryptid.
Yeah.
A lot of people who are cryptozoologists like to cite those initial sightings, but if you do that in a vacuum, that works fine. But if you look at all the other stuff that happened around Point Pleasant and some of the other things that happened just in that vicinity, it gets a little bit more complicated than that, I think.
Well, also, if you have a flesh and blood cryptid, that means you need a breeding population. It has to have come from somewhere, and there has to be something sustaining it. These things wouldn't just flesh and blood pop out of nowhere.
Right, and I'm pretty ardent about there being, if not something in the fossil record that looks like a cryptid, there being some sort of very short evolutionary leap that you have to make. So, of the Joshua Cutchin, Timothy Renner, Bigfoot school of thought, I am definitely more sympathetic now than he is about the possibility of Bigfoot being a flesh and blood cryptid. I'm still leaving the foot in the door for that as a possibility. But, things like Dogman, he and I are both firmly of the opinion that there's no room for that in terms of what we know and in terms of how we know biology operates in evolution.
Well, part of the problem with evolution is although we can see small adjustments in evolution and they make perfect sense, when you look at major shifts in evolution, we don't have a full explanation on how that happens.
Right, and it's not a perfect theory. I think that it's actually, I think it's a lot like a lot of material science. I think it's a great rule of thumb, but I don't think it explains a lot of things. I don't think it explains outliers.
Yeah, and I think we're missing pieces still.
Yes. But it's definitely, it's definitely what I tend to go by when I think of cryptids. So when I think of cryptids, Bigfoot could be a cryptid. Nessie could obviously be a cryptid, even though I think that a lot of those lake monster legends are talking about something a little bit different. And that's something we can go into if you want to on down the line in this discussion. Stuff like the Mongolian death worm, stuff like the Nandi bear, which is a favorite of mine that no one ever talks about. Obviously, things that were extant at one point, like the thylacine. Anything along those lines, Machilium membe, a lot of these different creatures, I think those are what we should really consider to be cryptids. And things like skinwalkers and dogman, certain Bigfoot accounts, I'm not going to deny that, and Mothman seem to, at the very least, straddle the line between being cryptids and being something of this sort of goblin universe.
Yeah. Well, I mean, okay, look at UFOs. There are plenty of UFO sightings that are anomalous, and there are ones that look anomalous that are more than likely, say military craft or something like that. So both of these things exist hand in hand. There's no reason there couldn't be an ape in the woods along with something more paranormal associated with it.
Yes, I mean that's sort of where I am a lot of days with my thinking is of one of two things. And I feel like Tim and I are talking too much about this book, so we should sort of keep it on the down list. So there's actually something to read when it all comes out. But
well, from what I hear, it's going to be a tomb. So
it could possibly be a two-parter. I'm not writing that off. But I think that either we're looking at a phenomena that wears the mask of a large wild man, in addition to there being an actual relict hominid,
at least in certain areas.
Yes, because there is such good. It's not even the physical evidence that makes me think that. It's just the fact that there's aspects of Bigfoot behavior that you find direct analogs for in primates.
Yeah.
Pillow erection, the hair standing on end, hooting. A lot of this stuff really maps on quite well. So I think that might provide a clue in that respect. The other thing is that if there is a magical world and human beings are magically operant and can be magically operant, if Bigfoot are magically operant, maybe that could explain some of this strangeness as well. Maybe they're just more adept at it. It's probably the more controversial of the two ideas, but some people would prefer me to invoke words like quantum, but Tim and I try to avoid that word like the plague because we don't understand what it means, so we're not going to talk about it in those terms. I don't think most people who think they know what it means knows what it means either.
That's part of the problem, because it's a very complicated science.
Right. Right.
And quantum physics is not easy to understand, and it's been kind of dumbed down in ways that doesn't quite reflect what quantum physics really is. Right.
I think that it's sort of like that old adage about people knowing just enough to be dangerous. That the advice that you want to take is not from someone who thinks they know everything, but from someone who says, "Look, I don't know anything, but this has worked for me in life." That seems to be the case.
So what about lake monsters? What are your thoughts?
Well, so you have to look at the company that these things keep. A lot of lake monster legends have they're in areas that have a strong sort of occult presence. The Boleskine House was famously built on the shores of Loch Ness by Aleister Crowley. And the other thing that I sort of talked about with Randall Carlson, that I don't think I'm letting the snake out of the bag on this, but he has noticed that a lot of the indigenous traditions that refer to a great serpent or a great snake are, in his mind, referring to the passage of a comet doing something. And that metaphor bears itself out through a lot of world cultures, the comet as a snake or as a devouring serpent or a meteor, some sort of asteroidal impact or some sort of extraterrestrial impact, I should say. Extraterrestrial in terms of being not of terrestrial origin. So his idea is that certain lakes in the northern hemisphere were caused by, he has some sort of specific astrological event that I fail to remember. But what I said to him when he said this to me was, I said, well, Randall, there was this idea that I believe was Ivan T. Sanderson coined of the lake monster latitude, which is this idea that all the lake monster myths, a majority of them tend to gravitate towards around a certain latitude in the northern hemisphere, sort of around that Loch Ness latitude. And that sort of tracks pretty well with this idea of an extraterrestrial impact sort of skipping and leaving debris and creating these specific types of lakes. And you spend a little bit of time talking to Randall, and he'll make it very clear that he knows exactly what he's talking about. In terms of so if he tends to think that these sort of lakes are a result of an extraterrestrial impact, I'm inclined to believe that. And the fact that you have this idea of, astrological signs, especially comets and meteors and whatnot, being associated with the dragon, with the serpent, with the snake, and then also this lake monster latitude, that all seems to be a sort of parsimonious idea. Now, of course, people will say that doesn't explain actual sightings in these lakes, and I would agree with you. But I think maybe we're sort of edging up onto some sort of collective unconsciousness thing with a lot of these other things. That, I think one of the most underappreciated aspects of a lot of the lake monsters of of the UK and Ireland is the fairy faith. But everybody knows I was going to say that anyway. So,
yeah, the part of the thing is, and I've been saying this from the beginning, is we don't know what reality is. We think we do. Because, we pick up stuff with our senses and we say, oh, that's what everything is. We understand this, but we don't. We don't understand what life is. We don't understand what death is. And we don't understand what reality is. Even our memories, I mean, we've been talking for like 10 minutes. And we don't know that actually happened. It wasn't just implanted in our brains. Because we'd have no way to tell the difference.
Right, we can only measure the measurable, and we can only measure that with this tool that we all have in our heads, our brains. Which, what does that even mean? That's a whole other different topic. But you're exactly right. It's like that old stoner, I guess, Cohen of sorts about how do I know that the red that you see is the same red that I see?
Yeah,
and I used to think that was the silliest thing, but it really does say a lot about about the objectivity of perception.
And we don't know. If I could see through your eyes and vice versa, we may see entirely different worlds, but we can navigate them the same because we understand what we're seeing. Because none of this stuff is what it looks like. It's all just vibrations.
Right, exactly. And between not only that and also but also having twins, it's made me realize that I could stand to be a lot more generous to people in general, because I'm not walking, as trite as it is, a mile in their moccasins. But everybody's got a whole bunch of different stuff that they're going through, and I'm sure that when I was driving back and forth to the hospital half asleep, that I must have looked like a complete horrible driver at some point, but one that a mirror image of me in a mirror universe would probably have been cursing at. So I think we can all, and that comes back to the biggest problem I think in a lot of religions is that grace is the thing that no one talks enough about.
Fair enough. Well, when you talk about driving, I mean, we all get irritated by other drivers at times, but we all also do stupid things once in a while. So the more cars you pack into an area, the more likely you're going to encounter that person someone else doing a stupid thing, or you're going to do a stupid thing. And even if that person rarely does stupid things, it doesn't mean they're not going to do that one stupid thing right in front of you.
Well, it's like what Joe Rogan says. It says something along the lines of, you take a sample of 1,000 people. What are the odds of at least one of those people being a complete idiot? 100%. So you multiply that across how many people you see. But it's like the old other thing that I think is something I try to remember. If you meet one jerk a day, they're a jerk. If everyone you meet every day is a jerk, then you're the jerk.
Nice.
What's your take on lake monsters?
I don't know, but I was going to say that we all also do idiotic things. Because I've had really smart people say to me, "Oh, I'm an idiot," and it's like, yeah, we're all idiots at times. We all do things without thinking. We all, it happens. And, some people it happens to a little more than others. Some people aren't as retrospective about their behavior or think their things through sometimes. But even when you do, sometimes you disconnect. Like years and years ago, it was a really icy winter here, very, very cold, colder than normal. And I had stopped at the gas station to get gas. And my gas tank was, the cap was frozen on. It was just coated in ice. And I'm like punching it and I'm not getting anywhere. And I'm like, great, how am I going to get this off? I need gas. And so I'm digging around in my car looking for like a wrench or a screwdriver or something like that.
You used a lighter, didn't you?
I picked up a lighter because all my brain is thinking is, what can I use to get rid of the ice? And so I'm like, oh, lighter will melt the ice. And then I stopped. I went, right, it's the gas tank. Let's not do that.
Wow.
But it's because my brain wasn't thinking gas tank. My brain
Right.
was just thinking, how do I get rid of the ice? And I'm desperately looking around the car for something that will get rid of ice. And certainly fire will do that. And maybe the whole gas station.
Reptile brain says fire.
But I mean, that's the thing, though. Sometimes we don't always connect all the dots all the time. I mean, our brains don't work like that, you know?
Right.
Like you get focused in on one thing and you tend to ignore it. You can't see the forest for the trees all the time, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Luckily my brain said no, fire bad, you know?
Yeah, I mean, and you know, I think grace includes. I'm bad at this, and I'm also bad at giving crappy YouTube commenters grace, but I'm also bad at giving grace to myself too. So I think that's something that we should all practice a little bit more of.
None of us are perfect by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah.
And as far as lake monsters go, they're not perfect either. Stupid,
just sad little lake monsters.
Stupid, arrogant lake monsters. You know, I've never seen absolutely convincing evidence of lake monsters. There are some very good accounts, and I don't discount the idea, but I'm really not sure what to make of them. I mean, again, so when you have Bigfoot in the Pacific Northwest, you have a huge area that is devoid of people. So a smart breeding population could live there undetected for the most part. But when you're looking at Loch Ness, for something the size of a plesiosaur, there's no way to retain that breeding population. There wouldn't be enough food. Unless there was a way out of the loch into the ocean and occasionally something, swam in, because I'm sure there's billions of things in the ocean we have no idea about at this point.
Right.
But if it is a closed lake, I can't imagine a breeding population surviving as a physical creature.
Yeah, it is indeed pretty problematic. I think that there are better lake monster cases to be made than Nessie, even though Nessie's sort of the superstar. I think there's some pretty good evidence for Champ and Lake Champlain that I have found really compelling. There are some recordings taken from Lake Champlain that sound strikingly like echolocation, something that you shouldn't find in a freshwater lake in the United States / Canada, unless there's something in the lake using that form of echolocation. Now, some of the fish that are in the lake can make sort of clicks that sound similar to that, but the ones that I heard sound strikingly similar to something like beluga communication, and I believe it's I believe the researcher's name is Katie Elizabeth, who does a lot of that stuff.
Huh.
And so that's I mean, that to me is better than anything that's come out of Loch Ness, in recent years.
Huh. But again, Lake Champlain is, I believe, a closed lake.
Yes, I believe so. I believe that it was not at some point. So there's still an idea that something could have gotten trapped there. But again, you're dealing with... These things have to be really wily in order to avoid detection on some of these lakes that are so recreational. Now, of course, I realize that Champlain is also a very, very large lake, but these things must not need to must A, be a small breeding population, and must B, not need to come up for oxygen long at all.
And possibly have very long lifespans.
Also true.
Because then you wouldn't need a huge breeding population.
Right, exactly.
But yeah, I mean that seems to be the problem with some of this stuff is simply surviving. How would these things survive? And like I said, Pacific Northwest or the Himalayas or something like that, you have plenty of room for a breeding population in those spots. But when you're talking about Pennsylvania, there's a lot of wild area in Pennsylvania, but for a breeding population to survive, you would think there'd be a whole lot more sightings.
Right, and the problem that a lot of skeptics make is they'll say there isn't enough room, or this area can't support the caloric intake to have a species here, and I think there's some very solid logic to that, but that's also locked into that nuts and bolts, flesh and blood sort of idea of what these things can be.
Yeah, that's why. But that's what I mean. Like when you're seeing them out in places that maybe don't support a breeding population, they may not be what they seem to be.
Right.
And also with the prevalence of these things, if this stuff takes on the form, if our brain puts the camouflage on it, and this is the thing, if the brain puts the camouflage on it that it needs to understand what it's seeing, and you see something anomalous in the woods, a hairy ape is something that might work for good camouflage for us to understand it. Because like we were talking about earlier, everything's vibration. There's no specific things out there that are exactly what they seem to be. Everything's an interpretation of our brain. So when our brain encounters something that it has no correlation for, it has to create a correlation. And in order to do that, it's going to start thumbing through its skins basically and go, okay, what's this? What's this? What's this?
Right.
Oh, look, it's a Bigfoot, and when in reality it might just be something that we can't quite place yet.
Right, and something that I always think of that people who want to sort of poo-poo this idea of co-creation or how much of our expectations play in our perception. I think we've all had that moment where we're expecting to taste something and it's a completely different taste. So yeah. It can be, if you're expecting coffee but you get, a mouthful of orange juice or something, it's like, what is that? And that's sort of a really just mundane version of that.
Sure. But that there is a lot that there's so much that our brain doesn't process about our environment. There's and it has to. It does need some sort of correlation, to kind of define what it's seeing at times.
Right.
And I think some of these out of place monsters, like Ken Gerhardt did the whole flying monster things, and a lot of them were one-off sightings. So how do you have a breeding population, but it's only been seen once ever? Like that doesn't quite work unless it's some kind of interdimensional creature coming from some goblin universe or something, or it's a weird bit of energy and our brain just kind of throws monster over it because we don't know what it is.
Right. Or people are lying.
Well, that's always a possibility too.
It is, and I'm sure it happens more than any of us want to admit. But yeah,
I don't know. I mean, it depends. You go on YouTube and you look at different accounts, and sometimes the fake ones just stand out like those sore thumbs.
Right.
Right. And then there's the ones, there have been one or two that I've had over the years on listener stories where I'm going, I don't know. There's no definitive red flag, but I'm not sure what to make of this,
Well, it's always that red flag of, as sad as this sounds, there's always that red flag of something being too well written. You tend to look at it a little bit more,
yes.
with a little bit more side eye. It's like, oh no, this seems a little bit too tidy.
And I think that was part of Strieber's problem, because being a writer, he presented his stuff very, very well written, very dramatically, and it was easy to be like, well, you're a horror writer. You're lying. This sounds like a made up story, and it's like, no, it's just that he's a good writer,
See, on the flip side, I think that Strieber was a good enough writer in terms of plot and in terms of making things have an internal consistency that sort of rules out him fabricating this as well. Because in terms of anything about Communion or a lot of his books, leaving you with a sense of satisfaction of a well-plotted novel is just not there. But he completely has that capability. So if he was making a whole cloth, it would make more sense to tidy up a lot of those loose ends, I'd think.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, he's always stayed very open as to what it is and still does. And like us, he occasionally leans more toward one thing than another, and then seems to kind of go back the other way here and there.
Right.
I mean, I know my views on things have changed drastically in the 6 years I've been doing this show.
That's very true. That's very true. I mean, I think that's a healthy approach in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
If you find yourself thinking the same old ideas, challenge them. See if there's some room to grow. I know that I've changed on a lot of stuff. I entertain the idea of nuts and bolts UFOs a lot more than I used to. Like nuts and bolts UFOs in that that sort of classic ET sense. I actually entertain that idea. There was a time when I didn't at all, but now I do.
See, I lean away from that unless Okay, so I lean away from the idea that spaceships are flying here from another planet. I don't know that that's happening. However, that doesn't mean that whatever these things aren't emanating from another planet. But I don't think they're flying here in nuts and bolts crafts.
Right. And my sort of sympathy towards the ETH has been more along the lines of, at some point in history, maybe more frequently than I would like to admit, maybe once a decade or something, there are actual nuts and bolts craft. I'm actually, like I said, a lot more open to that. I agree with you that if things like remote viewing and side effects are real, which is the one hill that I will consistently die upon in these topics, is that there's a reality to these things. You would have to presume that any sufficiently advanced civilization would also, if they are biological in the sense that we are, have discovered these abilities too. So why build a spaceship when you can just remote view? Now, what does remote viewing look like to the person who's being remotely viewed? Does it look like an anomalous light in the sky? Does it look like an actual, old school flying saucer?
Does it look like a ghost?
Does it look like a ghost? People do not like hearing that, though.
Well, I think a lot of I was talking to Tim about this the other night off the air. I think a lot of ghost hunters get into the whole ghost hunting thing because they're looking to prove life after death. That's kind of the thing. If they can prove that ghosts exist, it proves the survival of the soul. So when you suggest that ghosts may not be what you think they are, that kind of throws it, that upsets some people. It doesn't mean, and when I say it, I don't mean that. I think that some ghosts are spirits of the dead. I think some of them are reflections of things that happened in the past that left a strong imprint on the environment. And I think some are completely other, that have nothing to do with anything that's ever lived here before. And I don't think they're demons or anything like that. I think they're just other intelligences. And some of them may very well just be tulpas. Yeah.
I'm down with all those ideas. One thing that I think if you look at even people who have come out on the strong side of psi, like Dean Radin and whatnot, they say that the one part of magical practice that really sort of remains something that cannot be validated is the external reality of spirits. The idea that at some point you could still say that any sort of spirit that you have contact with is
external.
Well, yeah, you can't say that because it could still be part of you, part of your higher self, part of your psyche, etc. I personally feel that's not the case, and I think some people who are a lot better versed in these subjects can make some better cases for why that isn't the case. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right. There needs to be more discussion in the ghost hunting circles of alternative theories. I mean, we like to whinge about how little we hear different options in the ufology, but it's gotten so well. It's gotten so diverse. Rather, it's gotten so well. It's gotten so diverse that it's actually in a better place, a healthier place in terms of discussion than ghost hunting. Yes.
Yeah. Well, and everything's so segregated with these fields. I mean, you're starting to see some bleed over. I mean, obviously, people listening to this show, like a lot of these different topics, aren't averse to them bleeding over onto one another. But some people who are really invested in this stuff, they don't look at that other stuff. They don't look at the incidents of UFOs being sighted around Bigfoot. They don't look at, what else is going on in this haunted location,
Well, that's because the other people are crazy. Which is my biggest thing. I mean, we all live in glass houses, and I think that we should all have a personal threshold for credulity. I think that if you want to say that the flat earth is bunk, I think that there's a lot of evidence to support that. But to say that an eyewitness testimony of one thing has more weight than an eyewitness testimony of another thing is quite disingenuous because you're weighing the same type of evidence.
Yeah. I think we just need a wider view of all this phenomena, and we have to include ourselves into that, of understanding how we perceive things and so on and so forth. Because without that, we're kind of groping around blindly unless you understand how perception works and how little we perceive to begin with. So when you have a case where one person sees something and someone else doesn't mean the person who saw something was hallucinating. There's other explanations why that might happen.
Although that is a possibility. The cases that really fascinate me aren't the ones where one person sees something and a lot of people don't, or two people see something. It's where, three people will see something and two of them won't. Those are the ones that I say, that says something really profound about what's going on here.
And it tells us something about our perception, and even, stupid little meme things like that dress, or what was it, Yanni and... where you listen to the sound.
There was one that was even better than that. It was I can't remember what the other one was. I can't remember what the other thing besides Yanni was. Thousands of people are yelling at us right now. It was an even better one that I found. It was.
I think I know
something
what you're talking about.
Brain needle.
Oh yeah. Yep.
So if just anybody's curious, look up Yanni or brain needle. But I thought the brain needle one was better.
But the point is, it shows you how easily. I mean, sort of optical illusions. Which of course have existed forever, where you look at something long enough and suddenly it becomes something else. I mean, it gives you at least an inkling of how easily our perception is fooled.
Right.
I think the dress one was really interesting because, like, the first time I saw it, I saw one set of colors, and then I'm like thinking, is it like maybe a GIF that's changing? And I'm like looking at it, I'm like, nope, this is just a picture. And then all of a sudden I saw a different set of colors and went, okay, that's freaky.
Yeah, it's and I always found it interesting where I could look at things and turn my brain onto one or off to the other. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I'd have to go and push the reset button. The Laurel or Yanni.
Yep.
That was it. The Laurel Yanni thing. I would get into a rut where it would be really hard for me to hear the other thing.
Yeah,
and I have to walk away and come back to it.
So
the dress, not so much, because I could sort of see what was going on there.
Yeah, for some reason, like once I initially saw the one colors, when I saw the other colors, I couldn't go back. And I'm like, okay, that's messing with my head a little.
And what does that say about, the way that you are conditioned to believe?
True. And it would be interesting to have done like a study with that where people were told this is the color of the dress and then show them the dress. And how many people would see the other color then?
Yeah.
Here's the yellow and black dress. Are they going to, I don't remember what the colors were, but, are they going to see the other colors if they're told beforehand that it's a yellow and black dress?
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure some people would, but I think more people would see the yellow and black dress. The suggestion is a very strong influence in our brains.
It might in some ways be the primary driver of a lot of things, I think.
You figure none of us see the world the same way. Absolutely. Even your twins are going to view the world different ways as they grow up because they're going to have different life experiences. And those life experiences form how we view the world. I find a lot of people who are dead-on skeptics of this stuff, who just simply will not believe any of it, are the type of people who have never had any kind of paranormal experience whatsoever. And some of them have even tried, and, nothing ever happens. Where they've tried psi or something like that, and it doesn't happen. And it could be the equivalent of being colorblind.
Well, or they try and something does happen, but they find a way to... I mean, here's the thing that nobody really talks about. Even people who have had experiences, if they're isolated enough, will start to downplay the validity of that particular incident.
Oh, yeah.
I've done that myself. I had a very harrowing night in Waverly Hills Sanitarium back in 2000... Oh, Lord. Probably 2008, 2009 now. Mm-hmm. And I think back to some things that happened to me that were so, to me, dramatic, that now seem quaint and or I'm looking for alternate explanations. I walked away, 6 months later, it was the most profound, reality-shattering thing I'd ever experienced because it was, the most dramatic. But
why don't you tell people what happened?
I think I've told the story a couple times.
Yeah, but it's been a long time.
Skip ahead. Skip ahead.
I don't even remember exactly what happened anymore.
So besides stuff that is really easy to write off, like odd feelings, cold spots, shadow people, which sometimes shadow people are obvious, but the ones that I were seeing looked like they could completely be suggestion and a trick of the light, and it didn't seem So I would see one if somebody said, "You see that?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it kind of looks like a head poking out of a door."
Right.
So setting aside that and setting aside some stuff that some friends said that I've heard from subsequent encounters, people describing the exact same thing, which gives me pause. My own probably three really most personal experiences in order of least impressive to most impressive were as follows. So in the kitchen / cafeteria / sort of mess hall area, as I recall it, I got a very intense feeling when I walked in there. The closest thing that I can really compare it to would be getting a good slap in the crotch. And as soon as I'd walk out, I would feel better. And I had someone else, another man on the another man in a different in our group, but on a different sort of cluster of people team. Use that exact same comparison with me, which was interesting. That he walked in and he had that exact same impression that he'd been, nailed in the crotch.
That's a very specific thing.
It is. It's a very specific thing, and very unpleasant thing. So the next most dramatic thing is, if you're familiar with Waverly, it's sort of shaped like a very wide... I would say a U, if you imagine a U with right angles, but then pry those right angles out. So you've still got sort of 45-degree angles, but it's sort of like a wide U. And on one of the floors, I believe it was the 3rd floor or the 4th floor, there was a period of time where every time we'd get up to one of those corners, there would be this blue light that would... The best way it looks like is... The best description I can give for it is that it looked like the sort of light that you see when somebody leaves a TV on, or one of the old tube TVs that had mostly sort of blue light beaming in. It sort of had that quality to it, and as soon as we'd round the corner, nothing would be there. And that happened several times. Just right before we would get there, it would happen. And by far the most dramatic thing that happened to me was I was being pretty cheeky about all this as sort of a defense mechanism. And I was encouraging others to stay on. I remember this was the 4th floor. I was encouraging others to stay on the 4th floor, and I was approaching the stairwell, and the door slammed open in my face. And by slammed open, I mean it went from completely shut to opening so hard that it slammed the wall on the other side. It was almost like something, if you can imagine someone kicking open a door, in a SWAT team or something, how it just goes from completely shut to completely open. Mm-hmm. Right there in my face, nobody around, nothing behind it. That was my moment where you can't get the toothpaste back in the tube. And I find it fascinating how many people... There are some people who are skeptical, who have tried to actually have these experiences, and good on them. That's the kind of people that we should be encouraging. But it's amazing to me how many people will sort of laugh at things like magic, and I've never tried magic before. I did one thing one time in a pretty benign way, and I got some great results. And every time I think about it, I'm like, well, that was kind of what I wanted. So I really don't know if I want to do anything else right now, because that worked so well, and I kind of don't want to
jinx it.
Exactly.
So. Okay, so when you take somewhere like Waverly that has a lot of energy to it, and the energy is probably emotional energy from all the people that were there and all the horrible things that happened. Explanation 1, there are people who are hanging around there, who are dead, who, just didn't leave for whatever reason, and are capable of manipulating the environment. But option 2 could also be that when someone like you walks in there, that energy is sort of creating poltergeist-like effects that's initiating with you.
I think that's a very valid point. I think that if you look at a lot of these phenomena, they are more centered around people than they are locations. And this is not saying anything of option 3, stone tapes, option 4,
right? But
expectations that we bring in.
Stone tape, however, is more for the recording of events, like if you're seeing a playback of something. Right,
and there is an argument to be made, especially when something. With that door, if a tree had fallen in the forest, and no one was there to hear it, would it have made a noise? Well, if I hadn't been right there in front of that door to have seen it, would it have slammed open? Which I think sort of argues in favor of this idea of sort of having having a kindling effect for these phenomena, the presence of certain people who come in with certain expectations. It's interesting to me that the most dramatic thing was not the first thing that happened to me. It was sort of a build-up to it. And then that happened, and then the rest of the night was relatively undramatic for me. Almost as if, sort of something building up resistance until it bursts, and then it needs to build up its charge again or something.
Well, but the thing is, like, if this is essentially okay, so it could be something external very easily. I don't want to dismiss that at all. It could be something Tulpa-ish, where so many people have gone in there, because, like, I'm thinking about the slap to the crotch, and that's very specific. That's not like a door opening. That's very idiosyncratic. But it could also be Tulpa-ish, where it happened to one person, and then he said, "Oh, they smacked me in the crotch," and then someone else went in there, and that energy replicated it because they were thinking about it. And then over time, it developed into a thing where it just smacked people in the crotch when they walked in there, but it's not necessarily an intelligence doing it as much as like a crotch slapping Tulpa.
See, I tend to believe in the existence of Old Nut Tap. There's a demon who lives in there. Legend has it.
I mean, it's certainly possible. It's an an odd thing regardless, but I mean, it's hard to separate. The point is, it's hard to separate those things out. It's hard to separate out how much is coming from you, how much is coming from people who have been there before, how much is coming from the other. And a lot of people just assume it's all coming from the other. But, we're the one thing we've found, and you and I have talked about this, is that poltergeist activity seemed to filter through all this stuff. And poltergeist activity very well may be coming from us. It doesn't mean it can't come from the other as well. But if we can move things with our mind, even if it's unintentional, what does that say about how powerful our consciousness is?
Heaps.
Yeah.
I mean, I do think I agree with you that there's a possibility that we could be looking at sort of a linchpin for a lot of these different phenomena in something like poltergeist effects. I had something that was really oh, I know what I was going to say. No, you're absolutely right. And something that I'm really struck with in a lot of skeptical discussion is how they're actually worse about taking one idea and entertaining that idea and writing things off than anybody who's actually looking into these things. I remember I heard somebody one time say, "Have you ever noticed how what are these?" I think it was maybe even Neil deGrasse Tyson. "Why must all these ghost hunters do their investigations at night?" Well, you're not even considering the fact that something about this phenomena might have an aversion to photons. The fact that night has an archetypal weight, to it, has some baggage for it. I can't believe anybody can say something like that and be inquisitive. And I mean, I guess there's this assumption that time of day doesn't matter. But even for things like mammalian behavior, time of day matters. For things like tide, time of day matters. So why should any other phenomena be any different? It's just it's willful ignorance on a lot of their parts, I think.
So when I had Steve Mera on talking about the Seattle Demon House, who I'm going to have the guy who lived there wrote a book. It's a long book, and I'm working my way through it so I can have him back on to talk about it. But one of the things that they got on EVP was the actual voices talking about how they didn't like the ultraviolet light. Because the cameras were using the UV lights, and they were saying we don't like those. And so, is it like us walking into really, really bright sunlight and going, I don't like that,
Or something even more, intense. And if you look at what it's sort of the light behavior that Tim has described at Site 7, where seeing the light in the woods and shining laser pointers at it and it reacting to it, it really does make you wonder if there's something more significant going on there.
Yeah, and it's there's no easy explanations because it's so hard to take these things apart and separate them into different levels. There's a I think these haunted locations need some sort of consciousness, some kind of input from us, you know? Like to really kick up. Maybe this stuff happens when we're not there, because there's certainly, you know, cases of people leaving their house and coming back and things are moved. But also these tend to be poltergeist accounts where it seems to focus around one person and it's probably coming from one person. So space isn't necessarily an issue. If someone set up cameras in Waverly and picked up stuff while no one was there, would that prove it was an other? Because they're still looking at it. So they're still focus on it in some way.
There was an intention of that being observed,
right,
even if it wasn't an actual human presence there. There was something, if I recall, I had spoken about this at some point earlier, but there was a series of people who were alleged Bigfoot habituators who, in order to actually capture the Bigfoot phenomena, they had to film into a mirror to capture Bigfoot doing things, because Bigfoot were so smart they realized when the camera was looking at them.
Huh.
And I think there's a lot of really profound things about these phenomena to unpack in a practice like that. But I think the least insightful is that the monkeys realize that what cameras do.
Right. And yeah, I mean, there's also Rupert Sheldrake's work where he's shown that people have that sense of when they're being observed. So if people have that sense, there's no reason why other primates wouldn't, and there's no reason why something more paranormal wouldn't.
No, absolutely. And Rupert Sheldrake, in case anybody isn't familiar with him, is, I think, you know, Dean Radin gets a lot of love, and there are a lot of other consciousness researchers who get a lot of attention, rightly so. But Rupert Sheldrake has been one of the most consistently fascinating people that I have run across.
Oh yeah,
from not only his research into observation, but also things like animal telepathy, and his morphic resonance theory. I think still has a lot of validity to it.
Yeah. I know a lot of people have kind of dismissed it, but I think there might be something more to it. He may not have it quite right, but there's definitely something there. Sort of a species-wide collective consciousness.
Yes.
And his work is definitely very, very interesting. And of course James Randi went after him, and James Randi used very not legitimate ways of going after him, because he couldn't disprove his stuff, so he just lied.
Yeah. One of the best things that I have used that you have ever said, Seriah, was in regarding, you said Randy, that made me think of Uri Geller, and how even though he was faking spoon bending, that you can also fake a punch for a film. It doesn't mean that all punches are fake.
Right.
And I think that's a very insightful look at that.
And there's and Uri Geller, I am sure, faked stuff, because this stuff doesn't always work on demand. And if you're in front of millions of people on television, you don't want your stuff not to work.
Well, and one of the things that I heard in an interview with him, I believe was on Mysterious Universe, about from this new documentary, which I have not seen, which we should talk about at some point after I do, Third Eye Spies, about
I don't know about this.
It's a new documentary about the use of remote viewing in government projects, and he's gotten like everyone to talk about it, everyone to talk in the documentary. And I recall in this interview that he said that Uri actually sort of really liked the fact that his credibility had been undermined, because it made people scrutinize him a little bit less and made his jobs a little bit easier.
Yeah. I mean, I think, and I did a Patreon-only show with Walter Bosley, and one of the things he said is that when you put too much focus on this stuff, it stops.
Yes.
And one of the reasons, he would only do a Patreon-only segment talking about some of his experiences is because he didn't want this stuff to stop. And you see that. You see these guys go massively public with their experiences, and then it seems like after a while, now they just seem like they're making stuff up, and it's possibly because now that they've brought such a spotlight on it, the thing just stops. They've shown too much of it. They brought too much of it into the light, and it kind of retreats a little bit.
Well, I I think that a lot of these have extra effects and are affected by our lives in ways that we don't entirely appreciate. I was in a brief discussion with Jeff Ritzman and Greg Newkirk online about how, it's if you're into these things, it's good to have another hobby, folks. It's good to be into something else, just to take your mind off of it from time to time. I honestly think that my being forced to go music from time to time has literally saved my life in a lot of ways, because you look at people who get obsessed with this and there's something about it that keeps just battering away at your life, and it wants everything about your life, I think, and you've got to sort of distance yourself from time to time. Part of the reason that I haven't been on the show, among others, recently is just trying to find some of that distance and keep it at arm's length so it doesn't get the best of me.
See, it's sort of incorporated itself into my life, but I don't separate the paranormal stuff from, like, the spiritual stuff to me. Like, it's all part of the same thing.
No, but I'm talking about people who, like, just are spending all their money up, improving their occult library and are thinking about this stuff and listening to this stuff all the time. Like, honestly, there was a time when I listened to paranormal podcasts almost exclusively, and now I'm actually transitioning a little bit more away from that because I just need that change of pace, and I really do think it's healthy. So not just spiritual stuff and worldviews. That's something that I think is fine to sort of let this color a little bit, but for the love of God, go build a model train or something.
Yeah, anything you get obsessed with and overdo it with is going to be bad for you.
Yeah.
Speaking of hell,
but I think there's something extra to that. I don't think it's just that sort of obsessive wearing you down. I think that there's another. I don't even know how to describe it, but I think that there's another sort of objective reality to this force that seeks to wear you down, in addition to being somebody who's just like obsessed with stamp collecting or something.
Fair enough. That's entirely possible. Yeah, I guess I can't quite argue that, but there is a sort of obsession thing. Anything you get obsessed with is going to wear you down to some degree.
Oh, 100%. I mean, you're gonna burn out, or it's gonna consume you, and you're gonna push everyone away.
Yeah, you need a diversity in your life, period.
Yeah. Honestly, even though I am not a fan of forced diversity, I think that any healthy system has natural diversity.
Yes.
And the idea is to make any sort of system open and welcoming enough to increase that diversity.
Fair enough. All right. Well, I know you have to go feed some twins.
I do.
So
I do.
I think we can end there.
Okay.
Just make this a short little conversation for tonight, and hopefully
Sure.
we'll drag you back on very soon.
Yes. Let's think of the best way to put this. I mean, things are going to stay busy, but I mean, we're in the weeds right now, and things are going to get better. And we're in the middle right now of not having anybody here to help. So that's part of it too. Is that every 3 hours we have to go do this. So, but I wanna make it a point to be more available. I promise.
All right. So we will talk again soon and have you back on the show.
All right, sounds good, Seriah. Take care, buddy.
You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.